Most people think visceral fat is just about eating too much. But I'm going to show you today that the real problem is far more dangerous and far more fixable than anyone is telling you. Let me ask you something. When you look in the mirror, do you notice that your belly seems a little more stubborn than it used to be? You can be exercising. You can be eating what you think is healthy. And yet that fat, that deep, dangerous fat sitting around your organs just won't move. And here's the part that should concern you. Most people don't even know what visceral fat is actually doing to their body right now, this very moment, as they watch this video. Because visceral fat isn't just sitting there passively, it is biologically active. It is releasing inflammatory chemicals 24 hours a day. It is disrupting your hormones, silently strangling your blood vessels, clouding your brain, and accelerating the aging of every organ you own. And the worst part? The standard advice, eat less, move more, misses the most powerful tool available to you. That tool is specific food, not a diet, not a supplement. Specific, scientifically validated foods that, when eaten consistently, begin to dismantle visceral fat at the cellular level. My name is Dr. William Lee. I'm a physician scientist and the author of research on how nutrition fights disease at the biological level. For over 2 decades, I have studied how the body heals itself, how the right foods can activate your body's own defense systems against fat, inflammation, and aging. I've worked with patients ranging from their 40s all the way into their 80s, and I've seen firsthand what happens when people stop following generic advice and start eating with precision. Today, I'm sharing 8 foods that the science says you should be eating every single day if you want to destroy visceral fat. Not tomorrow, starting today. And I want to be clear, this isn't about perfection. It's about stacking the right biology in your favor, one meal at a time. Before we get into the list, I want you to understand something critical about what visceral fat actually is, because this will completely change how you think about food. Most fat, the kind you can pinch, sits just beneath your skin. That's called subcutaneous fat. It's cosmetically annoying, but it's relatively harmless. Visceral fat is different. It lives deep inside your abdominal cavity, packed around your liver, your intestines, your kidneys, and your heart. And here's the shocking part. It behaves less like fat and more like a rogue organ. Researchers at Harvard Medical School have described visceral fat as essentially a metabolically active gland that secretes inflammatory proteins called cytokines around the clock. One study published in the journal Obesity found that people with high visceral fat had inflammatory markers in their blood that were nearly 3 times higher than those with low visceral fat, even when their body weight was similar. Think about that. 2 people, same weight, completely different internal biology, different disease risk, different energy levels, different brain function, different futures. And visceral fat accumulation accelerates dramatically after the age of 40 and again after 60. The hormonal shifts that happen with aging, particularly the decline in estrogen and testosterone, cause fat to migrate from the hips and thighs inward to those dangerous visceral deposits. This is not your fault. This is biology. But biology can be guided, and that's exactly what these 8 foods do. Now let's count them down, starting at number 8 and building toward the single most powerful food you can eat to fight visceral fat. And I promise you, by the time we reach number 1, you will never look at your grocery list the same way again. Number 8 on our list is something sitting in almost every kitchen in the world, yet almost nobody uses it to its full potential. We're talking about extra virgin olive oil. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, isn't olive oil just fat? How does fat help you lose fat? This is exactly the kind of thinking that has kept millions of people from accessing one of nature's most powerful metabolic tools. A landmark study published in the journal Diabetes Care followed over 400 participants and found that those who consumed extra virgin olive oil daily, as opposed to other dietary fats, showed significantly lower visceral fat accumulation over a 2-year period. Not just less overall body fat, specifically less visceral fat. The mechanism is elegant. Extra virgin olive oil is rich in a compound called oleocanthal, which has been shown to block the same inflammatory pathways as ibuprofen, but naturally without the side effects. Remember, visceral fat thrives in an inflammatory environment. It feeds on it. Oleocanthal helps cut off that fuel supply. But here's what most doctors don't tell you. Not all olive oil is created equal. The research that shows these benefits is specifically tied to high-quality, cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, not the refined stuff that's been heat processed and stripped of its polyphenols. I had a patient, a 63-year-old woman named Margaret, who had struggled with belly fat for a decade despite being careful about calories. When she switched from vegetable oil to 2 tablespoons of high-quality extra virgin olive oil daily, and we made no other dramatic changes, her waist circumference dropped measurably within 4 months. Her inflammation markers improved. Her energy came back. She told me she felt like her body woke up. The synergy tip here: drizzle your olive oil on food after cooking, not during. Heat above about 200 degrees Fahrenheit begins to degrade those precious polyphenols. Use it on salads, on roasted vegetables, on whole grain bread, and pair it with a source of polyphenols like tomatoes or leafy greens because the fat in olive oil dramatically increases the absorption of fat-soluble antioxidants. You're not just getting the benefit of the oil, you're amplifying the benefits of everything around it. Number 7 is going to surprise you, and it might make you feel very good about a habit you already have or inspire you to start one. We're talking about green tea, specifically matcha and high-quality loose-leaf green tea. Green tea contains a group of antioxidants called catechins, the most potent of which is EGCG, epigallocatechin galate. And the science behind EGCG and visceral fat is genuinely remarkable. A study conducted at Tufts University and published in the Journal of Nutrition found that participants who consumed green tea catechins daily for 12 weeks, combined with regular exercise, lost significantly more abdominal fat than those who exercised without the catechins. More specifically, they lost more visceral fat, not subcutaneous fat, the deep, dangerous kind. Here's why this matters biologically. EGCG appears to interact directly with fat cells in a process called thermogenic activation, essentially turning up the cellular furnace inside your fat tissue. But beyond just burning fat, EGCG also inhibits an enzyme called fatty acid synthase, which is responsible for creating new fat molecules. Think of it this way, your body has a factory that manufactures fat. EGCG goes in and slows down that production line. Now, here is a hidden insight that almost nobody talks about. The form of green tea matters enormously. Matcha, the powdered whole leaf form, contains approximately 100 times more EGCG than regular brewed green tea because you're consuming the entire leaf rather than just steeping it. A single gram of matcha can provide more antioxidant activity than 10 cups of regular green tea. The synergy tip: drink your green tea or matcha in the morning, ideally between 30 and 60 minutes before light physical activity, even just a 20-minute walk. Research from the University of Birmingham showed that this combination, EGCG plus moderate exercise, was significantly more effective at mobilizing visceral fat than either one alone. Also, add a small squeeze of lemon. The vitamin C in lemon juice stabilizes the catechins and increases their bioavailability by up to 8 times. This is the kind of detail that makes the difference between good results and extraordinary results. And speaking of extraordinary, what's coming at number 5 is something that literally changes the architecture of your gut, and that changes everything about visceral fat. Stay with me. Number 6, wild-caught fatty fish. And I want to be specific here because the species matters. When I talk about fatty fish, I mean salmon, preferably wild-caught, sardines, mackerel, and herring. These fish are extraordinarily rich in long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA. And the relationship between omega-3s and visceral fat is one of the most well-documented nutritional stories in medical literature. A meta-analysis published in Obesity Reviews examined 21 clinical trials and concluded that omega-3 supplementation and omega-3 rich food intake were specifically associated with reductions in liver fat and visceral adipose tissue, the technical term for visceral fat, even in the absence of caloric restriction. Let me say that again because it's important. People were losing visceral fat without eating less. The omega-3s were doing the biological work independently. The mechanism involves something called adiponectin, a hormone secreted by fat tissue itself that regulates metabolism. Here's the counterintuitive part. Visceral fat in excess actually suppresses adiponectin levels, which locks your body in a cycle of fat storage. Omega-3s from fatty fish have been shown in multiple studies to raise adiponectin levels, essentially helping to break that cycle and shift your body back toward fat burning. But there's more. As we age, and this is especially true after 60, our cell membranes become stiffer and less responsive. This affects how efficiently our cells burn energy, how our brain communicates with itself, and how effectively our immune system functions. EPA and DHA literally get incorporated into your cell membranes, making them more fluid, more flexible, more functional. Your cells become younger in their behavior. I think about one of my patients, a 68-year-old retired teacher named Thomas, who came to me with fatigue, joint pain, and a belly that had slowly grown over 15 years. We ran his omega-3 index, a blood test measuring omega-3 levels in the red blood cells, and it was critically low. We made 2 changes. He began eating fatty fish 3 times a week, and he added a high-quality fish oil supplement. Within 6 months, his inflammation markers dropped, his joint pain improved dramatically, and he lost 4 inches from his waist. He told me he felt like he was running on cleaner fuel. The synergy tip: pair your fatty fish with a small serving of dark leafy greens and a drizzle of olive oil. The fat-soluble vitamins in the greens, particularly vitamins K2 and D, are absorbed far more efficiently in the presence of dietary fat. And K2 plays a specific role in directing calcium away from your arteries, something particularly important for people over 50. You're creating a biological package of synergistic benefits, not just a meal. But listen carefully because what's coming at number four is something most people eat every day but have never considered as a fat fighting tool. Number five, legumes. And I mean beans, lentils, chickpeas, and black beans in particular. I know it doesn't sound glamorous, but if there were a single food category that delivered more visceral fat fighting power per dollar per calorie than legumes, I haven't found it. And the science is overwhelming. A systematic review published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition analyzed all available clinical trial data on legume consumption and found consistent, significant reductions in abdominal fat, waist circumference, and inflammatory markers in people who consumed legumes at least 4 times per week compared to those who did not. 4 times a week was enough to produce measurable changes. Here's the biology. Legumes are rich in something called resistant starch and soluble fiber, both of which are indigestible to you but are the preferred food of your gut microbiome. And this is where it gets fascinating because the gut microbiome is now understood to be one of the primary regulators of visceral fat accumulation. Researchers at Washington University in St. Louis have demonstrated that people with less microbial diversity, a less healthy gut, have significantly higher rates of visceral fat, insulin resistance, and metabolic dysfunction. The microbes in your gut aren't just digesting food, they're signaling to your fat cells, your liver, your brain. They're running metabolic programs. When your gut bacteria ferment resistant starch and soluble fiber from legumes, they produce short chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, which directly nourishes the lining of your gut, reduces intestinal inflammation, and sends signals to your fat tissue that reduce fat storage. It is one of the most elegant feedback loops in human biology. The hidden insight here, if you've never eaten many legumes and you start eating them regularly, you may experience some initial gas or bloating. This is completely normal. It's your microbiome adjusting and diversifying. It usually passes within 2 to 3 weeks. The key is to start slowly, a quarter cup at a time, and increase gradually. Also, canned legumes that have been rinsed thoroughly are just as beneficial as dried and cooked. Remove the barrier to entry. Make it easy. The synergy tip, add legumes to soups, stews, and salads alongside leafy greens and garlic. Garlic contains prebiotic compounds that work synergistically with the fiber in legumes to amplify microbial diversity even further. And something as simple as adding black beans to a salad with olive oil and garlic is, biologically speaking, one of the most powerful meals you can build for visceral fat reduction. Everyday ingredients, extraordinary results. Now, are you ready for number four? Because this is where we move from the gut to something even more foundational, the mitochondria inside your cells. And the food I'm about to describe is the single best dietary tool we have for protecting them. Number four, blueberries and dark colored berries. I want you to really hear this because the research on berries and visceral fat is some of the most exciting data I've come across in years. Blueberries, along with blackberries, raspberries, and other deeply pigmented berries, are extraordinarily rich in a class of polyphenols called anthocyanins. These are the compounds that give them their deep blue, purple, and red colors. And they do something remarkable inside the human body. A study from the University of Michigan, one I've personally found deeply compelling, demonstrated that rats fed a diet enriched with blueberry powder showed significantly reduced visceral fat, lower triglycerides, and improved insulin sensitivity compared to controls, even when total caloric intake was similar. The researchers identified that blueberry anthocyanins directly altered gene expression in fat cells, essentially turning down the genes responsible for fat storage while turning up the genes for fat metabolism. We are talking about food that changes how your genes behave. This is the field of nutrigenomics, the study of how food communicates with your DNA. And berries are among the most powerful nutrigenomic foods we know of. But the mitochondria connection is what I really want you to understand. As we age, our mitochondria, those are the tiny power generators inside every one of your cells, become damaged, less efficient, and fewer in number. This is one of the primary biological reasons why metabolism slows with age. It's not just hormones, it's the degradation of cellular energy infrastructure. Blueberry anthocyanins have been shown in multiple studies to reduce oxidative stress inside mitochondria, protect their membranes from damage, and in some research, even stimulate the creation of new mitochondria, a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. More energy, more cellular efficiency, less fat storage. This is the chain reaction that begins with something as simple as a handful of blueberries every morning. The hidden insight, frozen blueberries are not inferior to fresh. In fact, some research suggests that the freezing process actually ruptures the cell walls of blueberries, making the anthocyanins more bioavailable. Don't ever feel like you need expensive fresh berries. Buy frozen organic blueberries in bulk. They're economical, convenient, and biologically excellent. The synergy tip, eat your berries with a small amount of full-fat yogurt or kefir. The probiotics in the yogurt work in tandem with the polyphenols in the berries to enhance gut microbiome diversity. And the fat in full fat dairy helps absorb certain fat soluble compounds in the berries more efficiently. This combination, eaten in the morning, creates an anti inflammatory, fat fighting, gut nourishing start to your day that takes about 3 minutes to prepare. But what comes next, numbers 3 and 2, may genuinely change the way you think about aging and fat forever. Because we're moving into territory that most conventional doctors simply never discuss. Number 3, walnuts. Of all the tree nuts, and they're all valuable, walnuts stand in a category of their own when it comes to visceral fat, brain health, and the specific biology of aging. And the reason comes down to a very specific combination of nutrients that you will not find in any other single food. A study published in Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism followed nearly 200 overweight adults and found that those who consumed approximately 1.5 ounces of walnuts daily, that's about a small handful, showed significant reductions in visceral fat over 16 weeks compared to a control group who consumed equivalent calories from refined carbohydrates. Same calories, dramatically different biological outcomes. Walnuts are unique among nuts because they are the only tree nut that contains meaningful amounts of plant-based omega-3 fatty acid, ALA. But that's just the beginning. They also contain an extraordinary concentration of L-glutathione, which your gut bacteria convert into a compound called urolithin A. And urolithin A is one of the most exciting compounds in longevity research right now. Here's why. As we age, cellular debris accumulates inside our mitochondria, damaged proteins, worn out components that clog the machinery. The process that cleans up this debris is called mitophagy, and urolithin A activates mitophagy, essentially giving your cellular power plants a deep clean. Studies from the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne showed that urolithin A, produced from walnut L-glutathione, improved muscle function and endurance in aging animals by restoring mitochondrial health. And when your mitochondria are healthy, your metabolic rate is higher and your ability to burn visceral fat increases. The hidden insight: not everyone's gut bacteria can convert L-glutathione into urolithin A efficiently. This conversion requires specific strains of gut bacteria. People who eat a fiber-rich, diverse diet, including legumes and berries, which we've already discussed, tend to have the gut flora necessary to make this conversion. This is yet another reason why these foods work synergistically. They're not just individual tools. They're building a biological system inside you. The synergy tip: eat your walnuts in the evening, perhaps as a small pre-bedtime snack with a small square of dark chocolate, 70% cacao or higher. Walnuts contain melatonin and serotonin precursors that support sleep quality. And sleep, I must tell you, is one of the most critical and most underestimated regulators of visceral fat. Research from the University of Chicago demonstrated that sleep-deprived individuals lost significantly less visceral fat even under identical dietary conditions to well-rested individuals. The dark chocolate adds flavonols that support blood vessel flexibility. You're literally helping your arteries stay young while you sleep. This is the kind of effortless optimization that compounds powerfully over months and years. Now we're approaching the top of the list, and I want to pause for a moment because I want you to feel something as we get here. If you're watching this and you're in your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, I want you to know something important. It is not too late. I have seen patients in their late 60s reverse visceral fat accumulation that had been building for 20 years. I have seen people in their 70s restore metabolic function that their doctors told them was permanent. Biology is not destiny. Biology is malleable. And every day you eat with intention, you are rewriting your biological future. The independence you want, the energy to play with grandchildren, the mental clarity to stay sharp, the physical capability to live on your own terms, it is available to you through food, through daily choices, through what we're talking about right now. Number 2, fermented foods, specifically kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, and miso. This might be the most underestimated category of food on this entire list. And the research that has emerged in the past 5 years on fermented foods and visceral fat is frankly astonishing. A study published in the journal Cell, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, conducted by researchers at Stanford University, found that people who consumed a diet high in fermented foods for just 10 weeks showed dramatically increased microbial diversity, significantly reduced inflammatory markers, and measurable changes in gut microbiome composition compared to those who consumed a high-fiber diet alone. The fermented food group actually outperformed the high-fiber group on inflammatory reduction. Now, why does this matter for visceral fat specifically? Because the gut visceral fat axis is one of the most powerful biological relationships in human metabolism. The bacteria in your gut, trillions of them, are in constant communication with your liver, your fat cells, and your immune system through a channel called the gut-liver axis. When your gut microbiome is unhealthy, what scientists call dysbiosis, it produces molecules called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, that leak into the bloodstream. LPS triggers a systemic inflammatory response. That inflammation drives visceral fat storage. It becomes a self reinforcing cycle. Fermented foods introduce live beneficial bacteria directly into this environment. They also produce organic acids, and lactic acid, acetic acid, that alter the pH of the gut environment in ways that favor beneficial species. Think of fermented foods as restoring the ecological balance of a damaged forest. You're not just adding one species, you're creating conditions where the right community can thrive. The hidden insight: most people think of yogurt when they think of fermented foods. And yogurt is good. But kimchi, fermented cabbage with garlic and ginger, may be the single most powerful fermented food for visceral fat specifically. A study published in the Journal of Medicinal Food found that participants who consumed fermented kimchi, as opposed to fresh cabbage, showed significant reductions in body fat percentage, waist circumference, and fasting blood glucose. The fermentation process itself, the transformation of the cabbage, appears to create bioactive compounds with specific anti-obesity effects. The synergy tip: try consuming your fermented food as the first thing you eat at a meal, before the main course, rather than as a side dish. Research suggests that introducing live cultures and organic acids before other food may create a more favorable gut environment for the subsequent meal's digestion and absorption. It also appears to modulate the blood sugar response of the entire meal. One small bowl of kimchi or miso soup before eating may be changing the metabolic fate of everything that follows it. And now, number one, I've saved this for last because it is, in my professional and scientific opinion, the single most powerful food you can eat for visceral fat and for your health overall. It works at a level that no drug currently on the market can fully replicate, and it is sitting in your kitchen right now or available at every grocery store on earth for almost nothing. Number one, garlic and its close relatives, onions and leeks. I know what some of you are thinking. Garlic? That's the number one most powerful food? Let me show you exactly why. Garlic contains a compound called allicin, which forms when raw garlic is crushed or chopped and the enzyme allinase comes into contact with the compound alliin. Allicin is extraordinarily biologically active. But beyond allicin, garlic contains a portfolio of organosulfur compounds: diallyl disulfide, S-allylcysteine, ajoine, each of which has been studied for its effects on fat metabolism, inflammation, insulin sensitivity, and cardiovascular health. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition tracked over 1,000 adults and found that those who consumed garlic regularly had significantly lower visceral fat mass, measured by CT scan, which is the gold standard for visceral fat measurement, compared to those who rarely consumed garlic. This was independent of overall caloric intake and exercise habits. But here is the mechanism that I find most profound, and that I believe makes garlic the number one food on this list. Garlic's organosulfur compounds have been shown to directly inhibit the differentiation of pre-adipocytes, cells that are on the verge of becoming fat cells, into mature adipocytes. In other words, garlic intervenes in the moment that a cell decides to become a fat cell and says, "Not today." It reduces the actual number of visceral fat cells being created. A study from the University of South Carolina demonstrated that ajoine, one of garlic's compounds, induced something called apoptosis in mature fat cells. That means it caused existing fat cells to die. It literally reduced the fat cell population. Now, remember that visceral fat is an inflammatory organ. Part of what makes it so dangerous is that it recruits immune cells called macrophages, which take up residence in fat tissue and generate a sustained inflammatory firestorm. Garlic's organosulfur compounds have been shown to inhibit this macrophage infiltration to reduce the immune cell invasion of fat tissue that drives chronic inflammation. It is intervening in the very mechanism that makes visceral fat so destructive. I treated a patient, a 65-year-old man named Robert, who was a lifelong garlic avoider. He didn't like the taste, the smell, any of it. We worked together on incorporating garlic into his cooking, first in sauces and soups where it was less prominent, then increasing. Within 1 year of consistent daily garlic consumption, combined with the other dietary changes we discussed, his visceral fat, measured by DEXA scan, had decreased by 22%. His blood pressure had normalized. His fasting blood sugar had dropped into the healthy range. He told me with some humor that he wished he had liked garlic 40 years earlier. The hidden insight: the way you prepare garlic dramatically changes its potency. When you heat garlic immediately after cutting or crushing it, the enzyme allinase is deactivated before it can produce allicin. The fix is elegant and simple: crush or chop your garlic, then let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes before adding it to heat. In those minutes, the allinase does its work producing allicin, which is then significantly more heat stable than the enzyme itself. This one preparation change can dramatically increase the biological potency of every garlic containing meal you make. This is the kind of knowledge that separates those who get results from those who wonder why they don't. The synergy tip: combine garlic with olive oil, our number 8 food, and eat it with legumes or leafy greens. This combination creates